Until the 1st of February, I'm excited to be partnering with HelloFresh UK. Get money off fresh meal kits delivered to your door by using the discount link or the checkout code in the description below. Get 50% off your first box and 35% off the following 3, as well as 3 free gifts. If you want to see more from HelloFresh UK, then check out my social medias where I've been sharing my meals the last few weeks. And what's best, if you sign up, you help support the channel and you can cancel at any time. Ladies and gentlemen, look who is back beside me on the Honest Football Podcast. It's a manager special and one of the old guard coming back into the Championship. So one of the old guard comes back to the podcast. Craig, over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the managerial specialist from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Craig Savage, and with me as always is Mr. Daniel Cody. Today we are talking about the return of Mick McCarthy back in the Championship. He has taken over at Blackpool as the new head coach. A statement from Blackpool is as follows. Blackpool Football Club delighted to announce the appointment of Mick McCarthy as head coach for the remainder of the season. McCarthy brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to Bloomfield Road, having managed at the highest level, both domestically and internationally during his 30 years as a number one. Well respected within the game, McCarthy also has a successful playing career with the likes of Barnsley, Manchester City and Celtic. His trusted number 2, Terry Connor, will also be joining Mick McCarthy at Bloomfield Road. Mick McCarthy said, "I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be back in the game. I'm thrilled to be back at a club where I've had many battles in the past and hopefully we can achieve something of the similar success of those years." The chief executive, Ben Mansford, said, "Since Simon took over, everyone connected to the club has worked so hard to get us to the Championship, and it's so important we all do as we can to stay there. We believe appointing Mick gives us that opportunity. Mick has extensive experience at the highest level, including 700 games at Premier League and Championship level, along with recently taking over a similar challenge at Cardiff." I think it's a solid appointment, but let's talk about the previous head coach, which is Michael Appleton. He got sacked after coming from the start of the season. We kind of said this in the last video while we reacted to Michael Appleton coming to Blackpool, was we're not sure about this one, and it's proved to be right.
Yeah, and let's be fair, it was a little bit difficult for Blackpool because the way they lost their previous manager, Neil Critchley, was a little bit out of the blue and probably one of the shocks of the summer. But we did have an inkling that this wasn't going to be right. And a lot of people did mention that we might be wrong early in the season when it was going okay. They were scoring lots of goals. They were looking quite good. But similar to Rotherham, and I don't want to drag another team into it, both of them have friendlier starts on paper, and it has gradually declined for Blackpool. And obviously they're now find themselves second bottom in what is a ridiculously tight Championship and still within 15 points of the playoffs, which is remarkable with less than 20 games to go. But yeah, I don't think any of us are particularly surprised. I think the timing was always going to be about now. You look, they're coming to the end of a really tough run of games. You had Sheffield United, Sunderland, Forest and Watford the last 4. Obviously, they did brilliant against Forest in the FA Cup. But with the end of the transfer window to come, with Josh Bowler and more attacking talents coming back, you just feel like now was the time they were going to push the panic button. Sorry. They're one of the only sides down there that hadn't changed manager during the season so far, probably influenced by Cardiff doing the same a few days earlier. And in my opinion, it's no surprise. A 24% win rate. They did okay. They looked decent in spells, but maybe we're given a bit of false hope by how they played under Critchley last year, which was remarkable.
Yeah, it came, obviously, you said start of the season. Obviously, it was a return. He tried to probably play similar style to what Neil Critchley had, and they got found out a few times. But one win in 11 is, especially in the Championship, is unfortunately sackable.
Yeah, it is. And I know there were a lot of 1-1 draws in there. One of the things that worried me in the latter stages of his tenure was the lack of discipline. 3 red cards in big games. The Sunderland one I mentioned, but then at Hull and away at Wigan. Red cards, lack of discipline, moments that ended up costing them points in big games. And maybe they'll regret leaving it this long, given the fact that they went through that run against other sides down there and didn't get the results. But I'm sure we'll get to it later. There's a reason they've done it before this weekend. It is a huge game at the bottom of the table. It's a game where in our prediction show yesterday, I predicted a wild scoreline before I knew that Appleton had been sacked and Mick McCarthy was in. But as you say, there can't be surprises. It was another unsuccessful spell in the end for Michael Appleton. But let's look at the positives. They've got an experienced Championship manager in, and they're still very much within a chance. They're only 3 points off.
Yes, Mick McCarthy is now back in football after near a year out after his last job was, in the Championship was Cardiff. It was Applewell before that in Ireland. But solid appointment. Obviously, we've seen a lot of new, younger head coach and managers coming into the Championship this season. This time, it's the complete opposite. They've gone for a real experienced manager / head coach.
Yeah, I was trying to think, maybe bar to an extent Bilic, is this the first one that's one of those proper, the old merry-go-round of managers? I think this is probably the first one of those traditional panic January appointments, get us out of danger. But as you say, it's a solid man. And while it didn't end well at Cardiff, they started that last season atrociously when he was there. But the season before, if you remember, he came in and they were struggling and he nearly took them to the playoffs. I think they went about 8 or 9. They just kept winning. And he had that impact at a club. And he does seem to be someone that, particularly in short spells initially, can get a lot out of players. He's done remarkable jobs at clubs on small budgets before. You look at what he did with Sunderland at the time, Wolves at the time as well, competing with bigger boys. And I just feel that, again, looking back at his time at Ipswich, where he was probably constantly in this position, fighting with a bottom 3, 4, 5 budget and able to get the best out of people, I don't think it's going to be as pretty to watch as it was under Critchley or even Appleton. But look, they've pulled the trigger and hoped it gives them a chance. And while I don't know it's going to be enough to keep them up, to get a little bit into my prediction early, I think it gives them a better chance than it did under Appleton.
Yeah, you look at his win percentages at his clubs, Millwall 35, Sunderland 42, Wolves 38, Ipswich 37, Cardiff 36. So that high, it's a pretty high win percentage for any head coach, and he needs to, especially with this second half of this season, to really get that percentage to be up there.
Yeah, and that's the thing for Blackpool, isn't it? It's turning some of those draws into wins. And I think it's a fair point you mentioned. I saw it. I can't remember who it was. It was a pundit yesterday from the EFL, and they mentioned with Mick McCarthy. You look at the clubs that he's been at and the jobs he's done, and he's maybe not been that appreciated at the time or been considered to be a bit boring or underperforming because maybe of the size of the clubs on paper. But if you look at all of them since, they're probably not in a better position without investment. I guess Wolves being the exception, but Sunderland had a great spell at the time. Ipswich, well, it basically collapsed after he left, didn't it? They thought the grass was greener and the next season was a disaster. Cardiff haven't improved. For all of the start was poor that last season. So
they've got worse. Cardiff got worse.
Yeah, they've got worse this year. And they're in big trouble as well. Who they appoint is probably going to determine Blackpool and Mick McCarthy's fate. He could end up sending them down. They do play late in the season this year. It's going to be pretty interesting. But yeah, I think it's a really clever appointment. It gives them an opportunity. I was a little bit surprised. I think we all were, to be fair, that he went there. His name sort of came out of the blue. He wasn't one of those ones that were being linked with jobs. We'd seen maybe a couple of times Wilder's name had popped up in the last few months. Warnock, obviously, with Cardiff. But this one came out of the blue. It's an interesting one. I don't know if it's enough. It's probably going to depend on the rest of this month. But I'm more hopeful for Blackpool now. And I think that's all they need. But I think the fans are going to have to get used to the style of football because it is not going to be what they played under Critchley whatsoever. And it does worry me, given who some of their best performers have been this year and with the return of Bowler, that maybe they are going to be playing a style that misses out the midfield a little bit.
Well, yeah, that was my next question. Obviously, Mick McCarthy's style is probably a bit more direct. Also, use a big man. Do you expect people like Bowler and Jerry Yates to be Mick McCarthy's 2 key players?
Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, Bowler's got to be a key player. He's the spark they've been missing since last year. There's no doubt in that. The centre forwards, it's great that they've got goal scorers at the club. It's not often something you get when you go in at those lower levels. And it was one of his big problems at Cardiff. He didn't really have goal scorers and he tried a few signings that didn't work out. And when Kiefer Moore went, it was always going to be curtains. I don't really know that they're going to be key for him. I do worry for some of the younger players who have impressed this year. I look at like a Charlie Patino on loan from Arsenal in the middle. They've just taken in Morgan Rogers, isn't it, from Manchester City. I'm a little bit worried for people like them, but he'll create a solid defensive base. He'll give them a chance. And quite frankly, from a financial point of view and from a survival point of view, the style of football isn't going to matter at this point. It's only a deal till the end of the summer. I don't think the Blackpool board or maybe even fans are suggesting this is going to be a long-term fix and that McCarthy will go on and manage the club for 3 or 4 years. But if he can get them out of trouble and then they can go and try and find their next Neil Critchley again in the summer, It just gives them a chance to breathe and reset and maybe try and find the perfect replacement for the long term while Mick McCarthy's doing his thing here.
Let's get on to his next games. Blackpool, obviously, they've got a massive game down at the bottom of the Championship. They've got Huddersfield on Saturday. You've already done your prediction. I'm sure you're going to change that again. I haven't given mine. And then they've got Southampton in the Cup, which is a free hit, really. And then you've got Middlesbrough away, Rotherham at home, Swansea away, Stoke at home, and Blackburn away, and Reading away in February. How many points do you expect out of those 6-7 games I just said?
Well, you can, again, I go back to it. You can see why it's been time now, can't you? Looking at that run of fixtures, maybe bar Middlesbrough, every game in there is winnable and against a side that might end up mid-table, depending on how Blackburn obviously decide to be consistency-wise in the second half of the year. They need to get a lot of points, in my opinion, because I know you've mentioned that bit, but then you look the month after, their home games are Burnley, QPR, Coventry. You look at the last month of the season, they play West Brom and Luton. Their final 2 games are Millwall and Norwich. They aren't going to be having a friendly finish to the season. I mentioned that Cardiff game in Easter. They've probably only got 3 winnable games or games against sides near the bottom in the last 7 or 8. So for me, February's huge. You mentioned that run of fixtures. I think they're battling it out personally with the likes of Rotherham and with Cardiff and with Huddersfield. And Huddersfield and Rotherham are in the next 3 league games. They are 2 huge fixtures. Home advantage in both. I know I predicted Huddersfield to win prior to this news, but they've got to get a bounce. They have got to get a bounce in the next week. I'm sure he will throw the cup tie against Southampton. He's traditionally done that with Wolves when they've been in Premier League relegation battles in the past. But for me, those first 2 home games, Huddersfield and Rotherham, he probably has to get 6 points for me, looking at the rest of the season.
I thought it would have beat Huddersfield anyway, prior to Appleton sacking that.
Huddersfield have improved. They have improved.
They have improved. They've recruited a lot better, Huddersfield, with obviously with Martin Waghorn. That's a proper Championship goal scorer. I just had this Blackpool at Bloomfield. I think they can, obviously, I think they would have done more than enough. Just about. I would have gone 1-0 Blackpool anyway. With Mick McCarthy in there now, if he gets a clean sheet, I think Mick McCarthy will be absolutely delighted out. Yeah, obviously they want to beat a team that's down there in the relegation zone, but get a clean sheet to start with, you can build on that. So that would be a pleasing thing for him. You said that, I think you said at the start of the season in our league predictions that you think Blackpool have gone down. Do you still think Blackpool will go down?
Oh, it's going to be so tight because there's a couple of stragglers we didn't expect. Just going back to your point there, no clean sheet since the 4th of October, which probably tells you where the problem is. One of only, I think, 3 sides in the league to let in 40 goals. But, it's so tight down there. It's going to depend on who Cardiff appoint as well. Birmingham, who, again, started the season well, starting to slide. Same for Rotherham. Looks like Hull might have got their way out with Rossini. Obviously, some of those big sides that were down there at the start in Middlesbrough and West Brom have gone flying up and now in the playoffs. And Stoke are the one that I don't really know about because it's just, there's something not right there as well. Are Bristol City going to pull the trigger with Pearson? Any of those bottom 8 for me could go down. From Bristol City in 17th down, I think anyone could go. Wigan for me are gone. I predicted Huddersfield to just stay up. No, I'm going to stick with it. Mick McCarthy, he might well do it. He gives them more hope. But I'm sorry, Blackpool fans. I think just they go down because defensively, them and Wigan are worse than the rest of the sides down there. And Rotherham to an extent too. And maybe that defensive record will decide it. So if I had to say 3 at the moment, I'd probably go with Blackpool and Rotherham as I did pre-season. And then maybe Wigan just instead of Birmingham because they're a hapless mess at the minute.
I think he can get out of it. I really do.
Oh, he's got every chance. He's got every chance.
I don't think they're going to run do what he did with Cardiff, but I think he's got a hell of a chance. They just need to create more chances to score goals. Really, 28 so far in the league. It's pretty low. Third, fourth lowest so far in the league. So they need to take their chances. I remember watching the Luton game. They had, obviously, Luton were defending for their lives, but they had some chances.
They had to score. They had to score in that game.
Did everything but score. But I still think Luton deserved the win. But I'm going to be biased. But yeah, I think they need to take their chances. But if they can, Mick McCarthy can get a tune out of obviously the front 3, probably front 4, then yeah, they can get every chance to stay up. I think they might sneak by a point. I think they can stay up. And I think Wigan and Huddersfield will go down. And maybe it could be a shock this season. I think either Stoke or Cardiff could go down.
Would be interesting. The only prediction I'm going to make, Craig, is that a big centre half will come in the next 10 days.
Oh, Roger Johnson's probably signed from already. I don't know.
Our retirement, lace them up.
Yeah, might as well. I know he's managing down at Brackley Town, but I'm sure Mick would ask him, no doubt about that. But that is our thoughts on Blackpool hiring Mick McCarthy as their new head coach. Let us know in the comments down below if you think he'll do well at Blackpool or not for the rest of this season. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Honest Football Podcast. You've got join us on Twitter at Honest Football Free. And we'll see you next time.